Hello and welcome to Lecture 5 on personality. So we're going to continue talking about Freud. Now, Freud's theory is called psychodynamic theory. And the theory is that the unconscious mind controls much of our behavior. Freud believed that our conscious awareness was only a small fraction of our mental activity and that most mental processes are unconscious. This is actually a really interesting idea. Something I want to be very clear about is there's almost nothing of Freud's that we can research, which we've had to really kind of reject a lot of Freud's theory because so much of it can't be researched. And now we have, the research we've done in other directions is showing us that, okay, yes, the unconscious mind exists. It is not at all what Freud explains it to be. But I just want to be straightforward and let you know that a lot of this has gone unresearched because it simply can't be researched. So, for Freud, your personality is your conscious awareness. Now, there's 3 levels of awareness. There's the conscious mind, the preconscious mind, and the unconscious mind. Now, the conscious mind is the thoughts that we are aware of at the moment. The preconscious is content that we're not currently aware of, but can easily be brought into current awareness. So that's information we can just reach into our brain and just pull right into conscious awareness. Easy peasy to pull it right out. The unconscious mind is material that the mind cannot easily retrieve. The unconscious mind is this dark, receptory, and it's chaotic. So it's hard to find the material that you want to find. You grab in there and you try to find what you want, and your hand comes back empty. You can't easily access the unconscious mind, according to Freud. So we're talking about Freud's theory of the unconscious mind right now. One of the great ways to imagine Freud's theory of personality is to imagine an iceberg. So there's always the part that you can see above the water. And for Freud, that's the conscious mind. That's what you can easily see. The preconscious mind is the part just below the water, but it's not hard to access. The unconscious mind is very difficult to access. It's difficult to see. It's difficult to get to. So I'm going to keep talking about this. So Freud believed that personality consists of 3 interacting structures that vary in their access to consciousness. The first structure is the id, which is a great word, id. My cat is nicknamed id because the id is focused on the pleasure principle. The id wants what it wants when it wants it, and it will do what it needs to do to get it. So this is the component of personality that is completely submerged in the unconscious and operates according to the pleasure principle. So I think about it as the 2-year-old within us all. The id wants what it wants when it wants it, and it will do what it needs to do to get it. So here we have the id. It is the most difficult part of the self to access. This is your unconscious mind. And then we get to the ego. In psychodynamic theory, This is the component of personality that tries to satisfy the wishes of the id while being responsive to the dictates of the superego. So, I know we haven't talked about superego yet, but we will. The ego is the parent. And the parent is trying to meet the needs of the id in socially acceptable ways. So the ego is the top of the iceberg. It's the conscious mind. Now, according to Freud, when we are struggling with our mental health, it's because of unresolved conflicts in the unconscious mind. The id just is not having its needs met. And it's the job of the ego to meet the needs of the id. But because the id is so hard to access, the ego doesn't always know how to meet the needs of the id. Now, when it is able to meet the needs of the id, it tries to do so in, in socially acceptable ways. And that's the superego. So in psychodynamic theory, the superego is the internalization of societal and parental standards of conduct. This is society and culture. These are the rules with which our society operates on a big scale and even in the family unit, small scale. So the superego is really the rules and interpretations of what is moral, what is ethical. Let me check something. Okay. So for Freud, here we've got the ego, the parent. We have the id, the 2-year-old within us all. And we have this superego, which is kind of exists on all levels of consciousness. So the superego is culture and society. It gives the ego the rules to follow so that it can meet the needs of the id in socially acceptable ways. Now, according to Freud, the id was very dark. Freud, and I think this has to do a lot with who Freud was as a man. You know, he's an Austrian Jew at a time of growing anti-Semitism. He and his family had to flee to Britain as the Nazi Party was growing in power. His daughter Anna was pulled in to be interrogated by the SS. And right after that, he and his entire family fled Austria because it was just a matter of time before they were going to be arrested. When people are really depressed for long periods of time, and Freud he struggled a lot with depression most of his life, it's hard to be optimistic about human nature. And I think we see Freud, the man, reflected in his theory, especially in the theory of the unconscious mind. You know, he's surrounded by, he wants to be admired so much, and yet he's surrounded by people who hate him and think that, you know, as a Jewish man, he is greatly responsible for everything that's wrong with society. He's putting a lot of pressure on himself. He, you know, was an achiever. Very compassionate man, working with a lot of patients, but also deeply depressed. And I think we see that in his theory. For him, the unconscious mind is dark. It is where a lot of our conflict resides. It is sexual, but there's more than just sex in the id. But when the id gets stuck, when the 2-year-old gets stuck in a tantrum, according to Freud, that's when we start having mental health issues. Now, because the id is so difficult to access, trying to resolve the cause of our mental health issues is very difficult, according to Freud. Okay, so we've got the id, the ego, and the superego. Freud believed that the conflict between the id and the superego is what leads to a lot of the anxiety we experience. It's really interesting how he explored this with his patients. He was developing the talk therapy as a psychiatric treatment for hysteria. And so he did a lot of exploration of the unconscious mind. Now, there's something called defense mechanisms. And these are unconscious mental strategies the mind uses to protect itself from anxiety. Now, Freud's daughter Anna was neo-Freudian. She followed in her father's footsteps and continued his work on talk therapy and researching psychodynamic theory. So, show you the chart of defense mechanisms. You'll see this in your textbook, and I do want you to be familiar with these for the exam. So, some of the defense mechanisms: denial, you've heard of that. Projection, you've probably heard of that. Rationalization. So I'm going to let you read those on your own, but I want you to be familiar with those because defense mechanisms are a big part of Freud's theory. Okay, we're going to break right there and then pick up on the next video. Thank you.